All right. Well, this week we are wrapping up a series called Greater Than One. Greater Than One. And basically, the idea of this series, this whole idea of being greater than one, comes back to the way that we understand church. And so if you've been in church for a really long time, this series could be a good opportunity for you to kind of stretch, expand what comes to your mind when you think about church. Or if you haven't been to church, maybe it's been decades, right? Or maybe you've never been to church before. This is a great place to kind of like lay the framework, or lay the foundation, I should say, for the way that you understand church. Or the way that Dr. Seuss would say, like the thinks you think when you think about church, or the feels you feel when you feel about church. Because I don't know, if you're like me, for a long time, the things that I thought about church were not all that great. The way that I felt when I thought about church weren't all that great. And it wasn't until I started to look into some of this stuff myself that the doors really opened, that things became a lot more attractive. And so if you were with us on week one, you know that we talked about how a church really should be greater than one, right? Like greater than one person. It's not just a me experience. A lot of times we think about church, and it's like, okay, that's a place I go to get like right with God, and I do my thing, and I check the box, and now like I'm good. But really, what if, especially in the culture we live in that's aching with this issue of loneliness, what if the community, the authenticity, the relationships that the church has to offer, what if it's the answer to the loneliness and the isolation that people in our culture are struggling with? And so we talked about really how church, when we think church, we should think it's more a we thing. Tom said this before, more a we thing than a me thing, right? There should be meaningful relationships, but in order for that to happen, we have to be real. We have to be honest about our doubts, our hang-ups, our shortcomings, our issues, our problems, our struggles. If we want church to be greater than one person. Then last week, we talked about how church, when we think about church, we're thinking about impact that is greater than one place. It shouldn't just be about what's going on the inside, within these four walls. I said it's not about like comforting insiders, but connecting with those on the outside. Like, what if we could have an impact in this community? What if we thought more about what's going on in the lives of the people who are out there than what's making us comfortable, what our preferences are in here? It's why we say we're a church for people who don't go to church. And when we talk about making that impact in the community, the way we do it strategically, what we say, and this is not what all churches do or what any church should have to do, but we say we want to be the help, not the hero. In other words, like, we don't need to start a food pantry here because there are already people who work in food pantries. They have the right people and the right systems to do it way better than we could, so why don't we just get behind them, right? We don't need to offer breakfast if IHOP is going to do it during the pandemic, but we'll deliver it because they're not doing breakfast better than IHOP, right? And so it's like, how can we figure out who's doing a good thing and just get behind them? We don't need to be the hero. We don't need to wear the church t-shirts. We just want to make an impact that's greater than one place. And I introduced you to a couple named Jesse and Becca Lusko. Right now they're in Portland. They're getting ready to start a church. In fact, they're just a few weeks in, and they've got the people and the team and the resources to do something in Portland, Oregon. And so we've just gotten behind them. They're our first official church partnership because we want to be the help, not the hero. In fact, we're here today because there are churches all around the country that have decided that they'll be the help for us so we could do what we're doing. We talked about having an impact that is greater than one place, being the help, not the hero. So today we're going to talk about how the church is greater than one in another way, and this will be the conclusion to the series, but first I want to tell you a story. So when Allie and I were dating, as things started to get serious, we decided, all right, let's get our parents together so our parents could meet. It was the first time our parents were going to get together. My parents from New York, her parents from Virginia. So my parents come down to Virginia, which is where we were in school, and we go to this restaurant for lunch. They sit down. My parents, they're Lou and Kathy, And my in-laws, they're Mark and Hannah. And so we're waiting for our table. Everything's nice. I'm a little nervous. I want it to go well. But I was pretty confident in my parents. And so we sit down, and my dad decides, he's going to break the ice with the conversation. And so he looks over at my father-in-law, Mark, or my future father-in-law at that time. His name's Mark. And he goes, "So, what do you do for a living, Jim?" And I'm like, It's Mark. And he was great. He took it in stride. But my dad, if you know my dad, he helps out here a lot. He's on the team. He's got a little bit of an issue with names. And what I've learned is that his approach is to just go for it, just like full confidence. He might be calling you a different name for a while, and he's going to keep doing it until you correct him. He just goes for it. That's the way he deals with it. Now, this problem has been passed down. I have a problem with names. Big time. I always have, but then after I started working in a church, it got like 100 times worse. And it's not just names like we just met names. It's like I've known people for 3-4 years, and sometimes I just reach for the name, and it's not there, And so if you've ever been in a conversation with me where you're like, it seems like he's avoiding using my name, it's because I forgot it. It's an issue, and I try to deal with it. I've got my own ways of kind of handling it and trying to finesse the situation, pal, bud. Now, this issue has also been passed down to my son. He's 7. He's got a problem with names. But the problem is he's a kid. And kids, they don't pretend, And so my son just feels no issue with not knowing someone's name, even if he really should. So, like recently, my brother was hanging out with us, and his girlfriend was there, his girlfriend Leah. My son has spent a lot of time with Leah. She's watched them, they've played together a lot of time. And at one point, my son Logan just walks in, and he goes, "Hey, where's that lady?" I'm like, "Logan." And I'm like, how do we explain this to him? I don't want to tell him he's got to pretend to know the name, but is there a way you could say it a little nicer, right? But the issue with kids is that kids don't pretend. Don't pretend. They do when they're playing games, but in real life, you just know who they are and what they're thinking. They show it. They're an open book. There's surprisingly, or maybe not, there's something about God that we can learn from that. In fact, there's this story that shows up with Jesus and little kids. And it shows up a few times in a few different ways. If you know the way that the New Testament is set up, there's 4 versions of the story of Jesus. We call them the gospel: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're written by 4 different people at 4 different times for 4 different reasons, but they're all covering the life of Jesus. He dies and comes back at the end of every single one of them. And so what each one of them does is they choose like different parts of his life to include in their version of the biography. And 3 out of the 4 include this. In other words, like this was an important thing that they felt like people needed to know when it came to Jesus and kids. And so here's how it goes. Here's the story. It says, people were bringing little children. I don't know if you can read that. It says, people were bringing little children to Jesus for him to place his hands on them. The idea here is that there were parents who were bringing in one version it says they were bringing their own kids to Jesus. In another version it says that they're just kids that are coming to them, right? There we go. But the disciples rebuked them. The disciples were these 12 guys that traveled around with Jesus, and they were kind of on the inside. Like they had the opportunity to listen to the things that Jesus was saying. Sometimes he would explain stories in a special way to them so that they kind of would be ahead of the curve. But they also helped the operation. Like there were thousands of people coming to meet with Jesus, and the disciples were in a lot of ways just like practical help. And so they see these kids running to Jesus, and their first instinct is to stop them. Like enough. Now, you got to picture them at this point. They're probably tired. They're running a huge operation. There's only 12 of them. And they're like, no. Like Jesus, he's talking to the adults about adult things. They're important things that these grown-ups need to talk about. And so send your kids over there to the playground and then come back without them. And you can talk to Jesus about big, real-life, grown-up issues. The grown-ups put themselves the front of the line. And the disciples are keeping it that way, these people that are on the inside. When Jesus saw this, though, it says he was indignant. The word here for indignant has this idea. It's not just angry, though that's part of it. It's the idea of being angry at some form of injustice. Like there is some wrong being done that needs to be stopped. And he hears about this and he's annoyed. He hears that they're getting on these parents, they're getting on these kids, and he's mad about it. And so he speaks up and he says to them, maybe you've heard this before, he says, let the little children come to me. Let them come. It's this idea that they're already coming. They're trying to get to him, but the disciples, the adults, the grown-ups are getting in the way. He's like, no, let them come to me. Like, just to clarify, do not hinder them. Don't let the grown-ups get in the way, he says, and then he teaches a bigger lesson here. He says, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. This whole idea of following Jesus, Christianity, trusting God, there's something that these kids get that grown-ups don't get. And he goes on and makes a point out of this whole situation. He says, truly I tell you, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child, right, like with empty hands, he says, will never enter it. And he took the children in his arms, placed his hands on them, and he blessed them. The kids came to him. Now, I think it's important to point out, we actually talked about this in a series called No One's Favorite Bible Verses. We did it a few months ago. This is kind of a story within a story. And the idea here, really there's two parallel things going on. You have these little kids who have nothing to offer. They're trying to get to Jesus and people are stopping them. Jesus is like, no, let them through. In the very next scene, you have this rich and powerful, influential ruler. The person who would have been like at the top in society. Everyone would have respected him. Everyone knew his name. He's got everything to offer. And he comes running to Jesus. And it's this idea that they clear a path for him. Like he comes and no one's stopping this guy. And his question is, what do I need to do to inherit the kingdom of God? And Jesus sends him away. And so there's this important point here. It's really a story within a story, like I said. Like there's someone who's coming with everything to offer, and she's like, no, I want you to come like these kids with nothing to offer. And that's an important point. It's an important point. Like I said, you go listen to that message. It's in one of our last series, No One's Favorite Bible Verses. But there's a story within the story here. There's something going on that really can challenge the way you understand God. Think about this. Jesus is saying, let them through. Let the children come to me. The idea was that Jesus was the kind of person that kids run to. Kids don't pretend. You know, like I can't get my son to like finesse not knowing a name. He just, I don't know it. Where's that lady? My daughter, when she was younger, she would just grill people. Like we'd be holding her, she'd just give them dirty looks. Like if she didn't like you, you knew it right away. She is the way she is. And yet there are some people, my kids, they ran to. When you were a kid, who were the people that you ran to? What were they like? What kind of personalities did they have? What did it feel like to be around them? For me, for a long time, when I thought about Jesus, I did not think about like the type of person kids wanted to be around. I thought of some like stiff, rigid, glowing figure with hands open and like a glazed look over his face. He's the kind of person kids want to be around. And my kids, they run to their grandparents. My parents, Allie's parents, they run to them. They go running to them. And you know what I can tell them? I can tell you about people that kids run to. They make time and space for kids. Like, there are times, honestly, where I see my parents or I see my in-laws, I want to tell them something. I'm like, hey, good to see you. We got this cool thing going on. But then my kids come running, and they're like, my Pokemon just evolved. Or my daughter's like, oh, I just saw the Barbie. And they've got a story. And like every time, my parents or my in-laws, they want to hear. They make room for them. They don't send them away. They care. They want to know. They make room for them. They accept them as they are, where they are. Like kids they don't feel like they need to pretend when they're around someone they can run to. They don't need to wear the hat that they got to wear at school. If they got to be the sports person in school, they don't need to be that with a grown-up that's safe to be around. If they got to act a certain way to fit into a certain group, you don't need to be that. You don't need to pretend to have your act together. You just go running to someone, knowing they'll accept you as you are. They make space, they accept you, they care. They care about the things that kids care about, whether they're important to grown-ups or not. Like I've seen my parents ask about who Pikachu evolves into. Not because they care, but because it's important to my son. And how my daughter feels about playing the viola. Or whatever's going on in their lives, they get down and they engage. They listen. It means something. This is the kind of person that Jesus was. Like kids are fighting through to get to him. And he's like, don't stop them. And he takes it a step further and speaks up for them. Because they don't have the power to speak up for themselves. At least not in a way that people will listen. He says, let them through. Let them come to me. In fact, he says at one point, he says, all right, here's how I want you grown-ups to think about it. Whatever you do for one of these kids, it's like you're doing it for me. That's how I want you to understand it. Because it's so easy to just shh and push them away. No, when you shh and push them away, I want you to understand that as you shh and pushing me away. When you did it for them, he says, you did it for me. And at another point, he speaks for them and he says, and if anyone, in essence, he says, if anyone wants to hurt one of these kids, it would be better for them to have a millstone tied around their neck and for them to be thrown into the sea. You know what happens when you have a millstone tied around your neck and you're thrown into the sea? He's saying if you mess with them, if you hurt one of these kids, it would be better off for you to go jump off a cliff. He made room for them. He accepts them. He cared about what they cared about. He spoke up for them. It's the grown-ups who want to be with Jesus that accidentally, or maybe even with the best of intentions, are the ones who are hindering them, getting in the way. And so if you step back here, okay, we just think about the whole story as a whole. And you may know this if you've been in church for a while. Jesus, the whole thing happens, Easter, Good Friday. He dies on the cross. He comes back. He leaves. But in the process, he says he's starting a movement of people who follow him and live the way he did. We ended up calling this movement the church. It's a movement of people that are supposed to be known for the way they love and care about other people. He's like, so I've set the example for you. You love people as I have loved you. The Apostle Paul would come later and say, it's as if you are his body in the world. You are his physical presence in the world together. This movement, this group of people, the church. And so for us, if we are his ambassadors, and Jesus was the kind of person that kids ran to, then we believe we have a responsibility. We want to be the kind of church kids run to. We believe we have a responsibility to be greater than one generation, to prioritize the next generation. You know what that means? It means we need to make space for them as a church. It means we need to make space in the budget. It means we need to make space in our schedules. It means we need to make space in the building. We need to prioritize kids and make room for them. It means that, and when I say kids, I mean 0 through 20. Like, it means we need to create a place where they can come as they are. Not where they're like pushed into some like cubby and told to be quiet until the adults are done what they're doing. Not like, I'm not saying we offer childcare, but we need to create environments that build up the next generation and accept them as they are, with all their issues, with all their struggles, with their real doubts, not feeling like they have to come in and pretend or fit a certain mold. They can bring all the crazy things they're hearing at school, on the bus, at home, to a place and know they're accepted as they are, where they are, and it's safe here to be that way. We need to make space. We need to accept them. We need to care about what they care about. Like our programs, our kids' programs, our students' programs, they need to address things that are on the minds of students and kids. They need to be answering questions that the kids are asking, communicating to them in a way that they can understand and apply. And we need to speak up for them. What Jesus wanted those adults to know was that it was their responsibility to get out of the way. It was their responsibility to make sure these things are available for kids, because the kids don't have enough power to speak up. The kids are not going to say, make us the priority. It's the grown-ups who tend to have a tendency to take the spot at the front of the line. And sometimes it's with the best of intentions. You know, we come into a place like this, put all our focus, energy, and attention into what's going on for the adults. And all right, where do we put the kids? Or do we prioritize what's happening in the world of the next generation? Based on everything that we know about childhood development, like all the research, what we know is that kids learn way better than adults do. The things that you learn at a young age, you carry with you all throughout the rest of your life. Like, it is not an overstatement to say that the lessons being taught downstairs right now are going to have a much greater impact than the lessons being taught in this room. Because of the way a child's brain works, because of the way the human brain works. And for us, that means we prioritize the next generation. It means we spend a lot of time getting our volunteers, our team members ready to serve in their positions. It's why we're launching our students group tonight for the fall. Now, we're only doing it once a month, and that's not because it's not a priority, it's because it is a priority. It's because when we do it, we want to put everything we have into it. If we can't do it every week really well, then we'll do it once a month really well. But it's important to us that we have the right people in the right positions investing in the next generation, in students who know they can come with all their crazy issues that students have to deal with, especially like in this day and age, and know there are adults that are there to listen, to care, to accept them as they are. It also means that we invest in parents. It's why I talk so much about my kids in here. It's not just because I love them and like to tell stories about them. It's because there's so much value in talking about the shared struggle of parenting. We have a table downstairs. I mentioned this earlier. Downstairs, there's a resource table. It's just got information about kids and the way they grow and develop. And it's presented in a digestible way. So there's in this one area, there are cards for every grade and stage of life. And all it tells you is what kids need to hear at that stage. So in my office, I've got the 2nd grade card and I've got the 4th grade card up on my wall because I got a 2nd grader and a 4th grader. And 2nd graders just need, you just need to know 2nd graders are looking for opportunities to have fun. Fairness matters, and they're looking for fun. And so when I'm looking at my son and I'm watching him, climb on a fence and dig holes and kill the grass that I just planted and I'm like, okay, he's just looking for opportunities to have fun. He needs to explain why things are fair and why sometimes they're not, because that's what's important to him. My 4th grader, on the card, all it says is 4th graders need you to know they got this. They got this. And so we look for opportunities to just give our 4th grader chances. Just go ahead. You want to bake on your own? Fine. We'll have burnt cinnamon rolls, but at least you got this, right? And it's just little bits. And these are resources we've had always. We just haven't always had them out front and center. But they're for you to take because there is value in investing in the next generation and in parents. If we follow the statistics, children, if a child attends this church regularly and considers this church their church home, on average, they'll spend 40 hours a year with us here, 40 hours. But if they live at home, the people that they live with at home will spend 3,000 hours with them throughout the course of the year. So we think it's important to equip parents who can equip the next generation. And so the question we're asking is, what does it look like to be a church that cares about the next generation? How can we make things better for kids? I heard a pastor say one time, he was talking to a couple who was trying to decide if his church was right for them. And he said, take as much time as you need to decide. Come as often as you want. Figure things out. Look around. He's like, I would suggest you don't bring your kids until you're sure you want this to be your church. And they were like, why? And he's like, because once you bring them, they're going to want to be here every single week. That's the kind of church we want to be. That's why we have the people we have downstairs doing what they're doing, even though it costs them. Some of our teachers all throughout the week, and then they're teaching again on Sunday because they care. And if what we just read is true, if Jesus really did say, what you did for them, you did for me, and what we believe is that, looking at that passage, if Jesus were to walk in here today and say, what are you doing for me? His first stop would be downstairs. And he'd see the people that are investing their time and energy, making that area safe, protecting the kids, making it fun. We say we want every kid to be known by name and have a place to belong, because that's where kids learn the best, while they're having fun. And so this is one of those weeks where I think it's just important for you to know why we are the way we are, why we prioritize what's going on downstairs, and maybe for you, especially if you consider yourself a follower of Jesus, to be thinking about how you can invest in the next generation. Maybe it means joining the kids team. Maybe kids like you, and maybe you're the kind of person kids run to. Maybe you'd be great down there. Maybe kids don't like you. And that's okay. Kids don't like everybody. But maybe there's a way you can support parents of young children. Maybe there's something you can do that doesn't involve you working directly with the kids. But there's a reason that Jesus said this to an entire crowd and not just a select group of people. And so, as a church, we believe church should be greater than one person, greater than one place, greater than one generation. In other words, when you think church, especially this church, we want you to think it's not just me. It's not just here. It's not just now. The picture that Jesus gives us of church is more than some of us would ask for or could even imagine. It's a privilege to be part of it, part of that kind of impact. I'm going to ask the band to come back up here, but here's what I want to leave you with. So one of my role models, his name is Brent Storms. He's got the coolest name ever. Like, it's a superhero name. But he's the chairperson of our board here at the church. He is the president of Orchard Group, which is this organization that we partnered with that helps start this church. They start churches all over the world. And he's the president of Orchard Group. He's one of those guys, you have a conversation with him, and when you're done talking with him, he makes you feel like you can do anything. A lot of people, when they go to their board meetings, they get stressed out and they come home bent out of shape. Every time I have a board meeting, I come home with a smile on my face because of him and people like him. He's the chairperson of our board, and he's the president of Orchard Group. But he also attends a local church in his town. He doesn't work there, but he attends there, and he is on their team. He's on their volunteer team. And as I was talking to the pastor of his church, he was telling me about how great Brent is and everything that Brent does. And of course, we were talking about all his accomplishments. But you know what he said? He said, do you know where Brent and his wife work every single week in our church? In the nursery. He's more qualified than anyone in the building. And yet he's down there taking care of kids with his wife so that young parents can have like an hour to just connect with God and recharge. And I think there will be a day that he stands face to face with Jesus. And I'm sure they'll talk about all the churches Brent was part of starting, talk about all the work he's done on the board. But I'm willing to bet that there'll be a moment where he points to the nursery and he says, you see that? Like that you did for me. And so my question for you is what are you doing for the next generation, for the faith of the next generation?